In economics, there is a term called the law of unintended consequences. Basically, it refers to the idea that actions, especially actions taken by governments or individuals, have unforeseen and unexpected negative effects, even when the original intention was noble or good. Essentially, what it means is that even well-meaning actions can lead to unintended negative outcomes. Well, there's a crisis in lumber happening right now that is a result of unintended consequences, and it affects lumber prices, lumber quality, lumber availability, and lumber jobs. And it was created and has been perpetuated by the US government. Well, we're going to talk about what happened and what can be done about it. So stick around. Probably the most famous example of unintended consequences was Prohibition, when it was illegal to produce, sell, or transport alcohol in the US from 1920 to 1933. It was championed by the temperance movement when people saw how alcohol consumption was linked to illness, poverty, and workplace injuries, not to mention the social impacts of crime, domestic violence, and overall family strife. And they wanted to do something about it, and so they outlawed alcohol. What ended up happening, though, was a surge in organized crime, smuggling, murders, and a decline in tax revenue. There are tons of examples of things like this where the best of intentions ended up causing more significant problems than they set out to solve, and I'm sure that you could probably name a few of those off the top of your head. But this video is about lumber and how government policies, which were meant to do good, have actually hurt nearly everyone. To really understand what happened, we need to understand the problem. Throughout the late 1800s and into the 1900s, the United States was undergoing a time of extreme growth and expansion. The population of the country grew from around 38 million in 1870 to around 203 million in 1970. All of those people needed places to live and work, and most of it was built from American lumber. The Pacific Northwest was the primary region where most of the softwood lumber like pines, spruces, and firs were cut to build America. But the problem was that all of that logging decimated virgin forests, and over time, the amount of old-growth forest land in the US was dropping, and there was a chance that natural landscapes would be destroyed entirely. So naturally, people wanted to save the forests, and there were a lot of incidents in the 1970s and 80s where people blocked logging trucks or chained themselves to trees to save them from being cut. At the time, it was called the Timber Wars. But there were two sides to the issues. There, of course, was the environmentalists on one side who wanted to save the forests.
These timberlands belong to the American people, so we can't allow any particular group say we are going to manage or handle this timber for our particular benefit. It's not for the loggers or the timber companies to choose or to make that decision.
And then there were the loggers and the mill workers and the logging communities on the other side who depended upon the forest for their livelihood.
We should get the old growth cut off because it's wasted land. I mean, it's a waste standing there using up land that could be growing a good crop.
Then something huge happened. In 1990, the spotted owl, which is a unique owl species that lives in the old growth forests of the Pacific Northwest, was designated as an endangered species. And because of that, huge swaths of old growth forests in the Pacific Northwest were now closed to logging. Now, in my opinion, it's a good thing to preserve old growth forests and virgin forest land. It's a good thing for us to conserve our natural landscapes. And lumber, after all, is a renewable resource that can be harvested from other places. But the designation of the spotted owl and the closure of these forest lands have not helped the population of spotted owls, and old growth forests continue to be destroyed in part because of government policies. But before we talk about why specifically that's happened and what can be done about it, I want to talk about this video's sponsor, Ground News. The world is a complicated place and things are constantly changing, and sometimes with news outlets on both the left and the right, it's hard to know what to believe. And I think that it's really important to get news from a variety of news sources, which is why I really like Ground News. Ground News is a platform that aims to provide a balanced perspective on news stories by presenting multiple viewpoints from various sources. Here's a recent news story about how the Biden administration, just before leaving office, withdrew their old growth forest plan after getting pushback, a story which deals directly with what we're talking about. You can see here that the story was covered by 42 outlets, most of which lean left, with only a few of right-leaning outlets covering the issue. If you scroll through, you can see individual outlets and how they covered it, like the HuffPost, which emphasized climate change, or The Hill, which talked more about how Biden's plans changed over time. In addition to telling you what they said, it also tells you who owns the publications and which direction they lean. This kind of detailed background can really help you comb through all the noise out there and better understand all sides of an issue. So go to ground.news/DIY with Dave to give it a try. If you subscribe through my link, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all features. I think Ground News is doing great work, and I really hope you'll check them out. So as I said, in 1990, the spotted owl was listed as an endangered species. And because of that, large areas of the owl's habitat were closed to logging. This was a huge win for environmentalists because they had been fighting hard for decades to find a way to save the forest. But loggers and logging communities were vehemently against it.
The environmentalists, the Audubon Society, all them people, they're going to take it all away from us, and they should be shot.
They were afraid that losing the ability to log that land would lead to the loss of jobs and the destruction of the communities. There were even incidents where loggers would catch spotted owls and nail their bodies to posts and trees as a sign of protest. Now, is it fair to blame the spotted owl entirely for the downturn? No, it's not, because there was a lot going on in the world at the time, including a decline in demand for American lumber overseas and other factors that really contributed to the decline. In fact, I recently made a video that goes into a bit more detail on this topic, and I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check that out. But the point is that those lands were closed. Loggers lost their jobs, communities were decimated, and the spotted owl and the old growth forests were saved. Or were they? Here's the thing. The population of spotted owls decreased by 65 to 85% from 1995 to 2017, and since then it has dropped by about 4% each year. There are fewer spotted owls today than there were in 1990 when it was added to the endangered species list. All of that conservation effort has not paid off. Part of the reason for that is that another related owl species, the barred owl, has begun encroaching on their territory. In fact, a recent review by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service found that barred owls have almost completely taken over spotted owl territory in parts of Oregon. So the most recent solution that the government has come up with to help the spotted owl is to kill around 500,000 barred owls. Now just think about that for just a second. They plan to kill hundreds of thousands of one species of owl to save another species of owl from extinction. Now I have a hard time wrapping my mind around the ethics of that one. Of course it's a good thing to save a creature from extinction, but I don't know about killing hundreds of thousands of another creature in order to do it. I don't know. But apart from the owl, there's another problem, a much bigger problem, and that is the loss of old growth forests due to forest fires. Since the Clinton administration, over 37 million acres of national forests have burned. And much of that was old growth forests, and parts of that were spotted owl habitat. That area was 7 times larger than the areas where any timber harvesting actually occurred during that same time. So we're losing more land and more habitat to fires than we would have lost to logging. But why are those fires so bad, and why are they having such a devastating impact? Well, fire is a natural part of the forest ecosystem, but in those areas, we fight fires so aggressively that the natural cycles that should take place through fire are suppressed. And so when a fire does roll through that can't be controlled, it decimates everything. In some cases, the fires are burning so hot because of all the fuel that's there that it's sterilizing the soil, and some areas are failing to regenerate naturally. Another big problem is access. Since logging is no longer allowed, there aren't any access roads which could help firefighters reach the areas where the fires need to be controlled. And so what happens is we just have to sit back and watch the forest burn. And that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy to the environment. It's a tragedy to the ecosystem. It's a tragedy to air quality. It causes all sorts of other problems. It releases carbon in the atmosphere. Does all sorts of terrible things. Again, fire is a part of the ecosystem, but when these fires burn, They destroy everything. So saving an endangered species is definitely a good thing. Protecting forests, especially old growth forests, is absolutely a good thing and we should do it. But these ecosystems are complicated and we're running into the law of unintended consequences, where because of our actions and our approach, we're losing more of the endangered species and more of the forest than perhaps we would have had we kept the status quo. So what is to be done? How can we fix this? Well, we need to be better at managing our forests, for sure, including our old growth forests, and especially our old growth forests. That means that we should allow some selective logging that will thin the forests, will reduce the fuel, and provide access where it may be needed in the future. That's exactly what the article that I mentioned earlier about the Biden administration was all about. Late in his term, there was a recognition that we are perhaps doing more damage than good when it comes to how we manage our forests, and that there needs to be a more active management strategy. The Trump administration has also mentioned that they would like to expand logging into certain areas of national forest, but they've not expressed any desire to conserve old growth forests. Added to that, the new Trump administration is taking actions that will definitely have negative impacts. For example, the Trump administration is laying off thousands of probationary workers in the Forest Service. These are employees who have less than 2 years on the job. These are the workers that tend to work the most and they get paid the least, and we're firing them. Additionally, the Trump administration has halted funding that's used for forest fire prevention, spawning memes on the internet like this. Now, those measures are being done to cut waste and reduce the amount of money spent by the federal government, which can be a good thing. But we're again running into the law of unintended consequences. If we don't have proper staffing and funding at the Forest Service, we are going to see bad things happen. We're going to see more forests burned. The lumber industry is going to lose timberland. We're not going to be able to log it. It's going to be burned. It's going to be gone. We're going to lose more old growth forest habitat that's going to, put more species in danger. And we're going to lose the potential recreational value of those forests for a generation. A lot of people are concerned about this. In fact, a logging industry group recently sent a letter to the Trump administration that called on them to exempt forest management programs from the broad suspension in federal funding. That letter read in part, "In a period that has so recently demonstrated the catastrophic impacts of wildfires, it is all the more evident that hazardous fuels, landscape treatment, and forest management is urgently needed." So we are again on the verge of making decisions that could impact our forests negatively for generations. And we really need to be aware of the potential unintended consequences that could come from this and do something about it. Now, here's the thing. It's been said that the symbol of America should not be the bald eagle, but the pendulum. In this country, we oftentimes swing from one extreme to another, and it's been that same way in our approach to managing forests. One administration wants to clear cut, consequences be damned, and the next one wants to shut down everything and put a lock on the forest, consequences be damned. We have to understand that there are multiple stakeholders here and that there is virtue to the arguments of each side. Perhaps we need to be more protective of some areas, and perhaps we need to expand some logging in other areas as part of a larger effort to better manage our forests and ensure that they are here for generations to come, not only for ourselves, but for our children and for the wildlife that lives there. Because what we've done to this point isn't working. It has reduced the supply of timber. It's reduced the quality of our lumber. Lumber prices have gone up. It's led to the destruction of habitats and old growth forests on a large scale. It's decimated logging towns and logging families. And the kicker is that we've known about these negative effects for a long time, but we haven't really done anything about it.
And almost every special interest group considers that what is right for them is right for the public, in quotes. There is no one public. Perhaps any one of those groups might represent a large segment of the public, but maybe they don't. The one group that does represent a large segment of the public is called the Congress. Over the last couple of decades, it's become more and more clear that we can't have it all. That the national forests are in fact a finite piece of land, albeit a large one in a national scope, and that some of the uses that occur on those national forests are also finite. And that starts to focus in on issues like old growth. A lot of our disagreements begin to focus around those deep-held values of what each of our special interests are, and the recognition that in the final solution, maybe none of us are going to get exactly what we wanted.
I just wish that our representatives were more responsive. I wish that we could identify a problem and work on common sense solutions that take into account the needs of multiple stakeholders. And when we see unintended consequences, that we can pivot and make sure that we can make changes that make our laws better and more effective. What I'm afraid of is that most of our representatives are not interested in solutions, but rather in perpetuating problems so that they have something to run on. They're more interested in scoring political points and getting more power than they are in really providing long-lasting solutions that benefit the country. I just wish that we were better, and I hope that we can get there. So I want to hear from you. What are some of the unintended consequences that you've seen in your life? Things that went all wrong despite initial good intentions. Be sure to leave me a comment. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.